And welcome back. Well, if the polls are anything to go by, things are not looking good for the Trump campaign. But as we saw in 2016, the race could be a lot tighter than the polls are showing. Of course, when I caught up with Steve Bannon a bit earlier, I asked him for his prediction for the presidential race. Here's what he had to say. Obviously, back in 2016, you had run the campaign for Trump. Many people credit you in a large part with Trump's victory, and they say it was a masterful campaign. What's your view of the Trump campaign this year under Bill Stepien?
I think, Bill, when they made the change in June, a lot of the donors had come to me about stepping into the campaign. I said, look, the campaign is very different in 20 than it was in 16. Stepien's a fantastic guy. He ran the ground game for us. 3 of my partners from the war room actually stepped into the campaign at that time. Jason Miller, my wingman, Greg Manns, who ran the war room, and Steve Cortez. So you've got a big war room influence, and I talk to those guys all the time. The campaign's been fine because the campaign really is very different when you're an incumbent, and they're really going on your record and what's your vision. So it's very different as an outsider. And I knew at the time I had to do things that you couldn't do in the campaign. Number one, this plot to steal the 2020 election. The biggest thing we got going on, and Sherry, you've been on the war and pandemic a number of times. We cover this thing very seriously. You're one of the most serious journalists in the world in covering this, and we try to have all voices on there. What the mainstream media did here in the United States was create a sense of hysteria. So they've traumatized the Democratic base. I saw that early on, and I knew that we're going to have to not just win on election day, but we're going to have to put together an entire team to hold the election. Because what's going to happen right now, it looks like this thing is so close, it's going to go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. That's where I knew I would be needed. Also, I thought there would be opportunities like this that would pop up that would need the assistance I can give Mayor Giuliani, and given that special, Steve Bannon, Darth Vader touch to things to give a little edge to them that would be needed in the closing days of the campaign.
Well, Trump is even further behind in the polls now than he was in 2016. And of course, in 2016, everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to win, but he is further behind in the polls now. Do you think seriously that Trump can win at this point? And if so, what is his pathway there?
Here's the one thing in the polls. This is why I didn't step back into the campaign in June. You've got to look at who's going to vote on game day, who's going to actually vote on election day, or the real vote, versus these mail-in ballots. Remember, right now we could have anywhere from 50, 60, 70, 80 million mail-in ballots. They all have to be certified. So when you talk about polls, you got to find out with that poll, who's actually going to go vote in a traditional election and who's going to use a mail-in vote. If you do it that way, it changes quite radically. So just keep your Australian audience to understand their polls and their polls. And look, I was the guy from the beginning who told President Trump he was going to win 100% metaphysical certitude, because I kind of see how we can put this together. This thing is much closer than it's being reported. A lot of this is just the mainstream media kicking up the dust. The national polls are never going to win because that takes into account California, New York, Illinois, these massive blue states with these massive cities. So it's the electoral vote in the battleground states in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina. These are dogfights. But the key thing is who's going to bring out low propensity voters. What we did in 16 was bring out people who don't traditionally vote. They voted for Trump. The whole recruiting process, and this is why Bill Stepien's head of the campaign. Stepien's specialty is ground game. Right now, this is not a philosophical debate, and it's not any persuasion. You're not going to persuade women in suburbs to suddenly love Trump, right? It's just not going to happen. You've got to get out your base, and you've got to get out low propensity voters. We've seen a massive turnout so far in this early voting, in the mail-in vote. I think up to now, right now, over 20 million people have voted already. They're expecting, we had 132 million, I think, voted in 16. They're talking about maybe up to 150 million. I had kind of projected that early on in my analysis, that it'd be north of 150 million votes or close to it. It all depends on which group got out low propensity voters. I happen to think right now, a lot of this vote you see in the Democrats may be cannibalizing their game day vote. So we have to see. I would tell you, Australian audience, as it stands right now, this is much closer than being reported, but both sides have to close. I happen to believe that when the American people fully assess this information that's coming out on Joe Biden, and even though it's being blocked by mainstream media, it's being blocked by Twitter and Facebook, this is getting out. The Daily Mail's got it. Every news source has it up. All the websites have it up. It's what everybody's talking about. There's more horrific information to come out. Number one, on more financial information about their corruption. There's also a lot of information coming out about the depravity of these people. And I think that's going to shock people. So we'll have to see. I happen to think it's very close. President Trump's running a tough campaign. I think President Trump's going to win on Election Day. I think the Democrats are then going to fight with all these new rule changes and try to count all of these, uncertifiable ballots in the weeks after. I think we're going to have a huge fight. I think it's going to the Supreme Court. I actually believe if it's tight enough, it actually get kicked into the House of Representatives in January. So I don't expect, as I see it right now, that this thing's going to get settled anytime soon.
Look, finally, Steve Bannon, before I let you go, if the president doesn't get there this time, will it be his handling of the pandemic that has cost him the presidency?
I think, first off, if the president, I don't think the president's going to lose. I think the president's going to win, but I'll make this prediction right now. If for any reason the election's stolen from him or in some sort of way Joe Biden's declared the winner, President Trump will announce that he's going to run for re-election in 2024. You're not going to see the end of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the head of a populist nationalist movement here in the United States. I think President Trump realizes now that we needed more populism and more economic nationalism. I think a lot of things that people in the establishment of the Republican Party and also in his administration convinced him of, he's just going to do away with. He'll be much more populist and nationalist in a second term. And if there was any reason that he was to lose, which I don't think will happen, however, if it does, Trump will announce right away, I think he's running in 2024, and he'll take on all comers and be reelected then. So I think that this is a movement in this country. Its focus, one of the big focuses is to basically confront the Chinese Communist Party and make sure that their business model does not spread throughout the world. And I think there's many, many people in this country assisting the Chinese people in their liberation. So this is a historic moment in American political history, a historic moment in American history. And I don't think President Trump's going anywhere.
Steve Bannon, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Sherry, thank you. And thank you so much for coming on our show. The American audience thinks you're amazing. All the breaking news you give us on the cutting edge out there in Australia. So we have a big Australian audience because of you. We're really, really, really happy about it. Thank you so much.
And that was the former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon with a prediction that if Trump loses, he will be back for re-election in 2024 in a version that is even more populist and even more nationalist. What a thought.